We don't have like a dun dun dun. We need like a music like intro. Like
We need the bumper.
later on, we'll get there. But right now, I should probably go and like let people know because we have this little community.
We
Uh,
do.
it's like picking up. So maybe let's just go and holler and be like, "Hey guys, we're doing."
Yeah. In the meantime, like you said, I want to hopefully get some time this week to work on some stuff like that, like a bumper and some branding. I was gonna. I mean, I know we're live, but we're just having a casual conversation
Yeah.
anyway. But I was gonna send you. I had there's this really great artist on Twitter, and I'm missing his name right now. I think it's David O'Neill. Oh God, I'm dumb for not knowing this, but I'll find it. And he did my avatar, and I was gonna reach out to you and send you his link. And he does avatars. Like if you get like a cartoon avatar done,
Uh-huh.
I'm picturing like I can't remember what sports show it was, but there was like two cartoon heads like talking to each other. And I figured we could do like a graphic like that for office hours with like I have some Adobe stock that has like we can get some illustrations of like the office in the background, and then the two like talking heads,
There you go.
and just like some typeface and just have office hours. So taking that, we could then pull those elements into the stream, have like a little thing at the bottom, and
Yeah.
just do a bunch of things with that. So I think if we start there that with that this week, we can start to put together some stuff for the show.
So not to put you on the spot, but I I like this office hours a lot. I like the way that it goes. I like the conversations that have spun up afterwards.
Yeah.
How do you feel about adding another one this week?
Um, we shall see. So I obviously want to do a lot more of these. To be honest, I have some things that I need to catch up on. So
Oh yeah,
until we have, so if everybody doesn't know, we have our first big Spring One tour coming up, and the end of April, and then I'm actually out the week before on vacation. So I'm running short on time to like get that thing wrapped up. I don't want to be on vacation putting final touches on a presentation for the following week. So
I am on vacation the week after that first one, and I hope
nice.
it doesn't over. So there's our spring one. Where are the spring one tour?
This is on the Tanzu Developer Center. So if you just do a quick Spring One Tour Google, Spring One Tour 2022, it should be the third link there. Oh, nope. Sorry, that is the
Changed.
one.
Everything changed. Where
Yeah, I had that.
is that? Spring one.
Yeah, I have it in my newsletter. So I will go ahead and grab that link. I have it right here. Spring One Tour is back.
That.
I'm going to go ahead and put this in the chat. So there's that link.
Spring one tour. Awesome. And I'll throw Chicago on there. Boom.
Yeah.
See, yeah, we're all sorts of news, all sorts of good stuff right out the gate. Yeah, we're doing stuff. So yeah, I get it.
So yes, I want to do more of these office hours on. Let me grab that. Office hours on a Monday. Neat. Yeah. We're still figuring out things with this show, but one of the things I love about a Monday morning is kind of the chance to take the weekend and then now you get to reflect on the week that was prior. So if there are things that I was working on last week, I can kind of show those off today. Monday is usually a good day for like our calendar of like, hey, here's what happened last week. Here's what's happening this week. So yeah, it works out. And it just so happens that I release a newsletter on Monday morning. So I'm kind of fresh with everything that I've been talking about for the prior weeks.
Awesome. Awesome. So yeah, how about I recap my week last week?
Perfect.
On the Twitter community, we had some questions around the Eureka discovery. So I took that for a spin on our show on code on Wednesday, just to like explore, remind myself, refresh myself around the Eureka Discovery server. The question was around clients and if they should register or not. And yeah, we took it for a spin. I'm also doing a lot of exploration with Spring Native. So I kind of went down the path to determine if I could do the same patterns that I've done in the past, all in Spring Native. And I ran into a little hiccup where, hey, we're not going to support the Eureka Discovery server with Spring Native at any point in the near or foreseeable future. So yeah, that's kind of some of the stuff I learned last week. And then at the end of the week, you and I both had a meeting around kind of the security, and it's great how some of these interesting patterns that we see out with our enterprise customers and out the community, how they, when we hit milestone, they kind of lead to more interesting conversations and other interesting ways of delivering value, like inside of the company. So yeah, that was good. I also did a really fun workshop where I was able to stand up. It was TCE, but then also like stand it up and then take a start.spring.io workload and slap some YAML on it and then throw it into that locally running cluster, which was fun. So just knowing that all those things kind of work, I'm exploring that local developer experience and just refreshing myself with all of these awesome Spring patterns that we have.
Cool. Let me share. I'm going to share my screen. Awesome. I can cover a few things that. Do you want to get into? Do you want to do a demo first, or do you want me to do a demo first?
I'll let you drive. Sachin, okay. Artan, Coder Grammar. Thanks for joining.
So yeah, let me recap last week. You forgot one very big presentation that we had last week.
Yes.
Deshaun and I both hosted Tanzu Tuesday, which was a lot of fun. We sat down with Christoph Strobel from the Spring Data team. We talked about persistence with Spring Data, what it is, and what's coming next. So there is a video here. If you're on my newsletter, it's the latest one, where we could throw that in the chat. But that was a really good presentation by Christoph. I thought he did just a really good job of breaking down Spring Data and just kind of how, for those of you out there who may not know what Spring Data is, just kind of this consistent abstraction across multiple data stores, right? So like if you are on one project and you're working with MySQL and JDBC, there's Spring Data JDBC, and then maybe you're working with Redis on another project, and there's this consistent abstraction layer so that, if you're doing the things that you want to do with Spring Data, you can do them across multiple stores. So we did a really good job of breaking down what Spring Data was and kind of how the repositories work. And we talked about one of my new favorite repositories, which is the ListCred repository. And I put together a video on that, just talking about what that was. I also had some fun last week with Spring Boot Notion. So I'm a big fan of Notion. I use it to store everything that I'm working on. It's kind of my left brain, kind of storing, my second brain, storing everything that I do personally and professionally. So this was really just how you could connect to Notion, because Notion has an API in a Spring Boot app. So if you want to use it as like a CMS, that's kind of what I'm doing with it. And so I pulled some data down and did some stuff there. So that was pretty much my week. What I want to get into today is just a quick chat about Spring Boot 3.0.
Hey, before we do that,
let's just
pull up the calendar.
Oh yeah,
calendar.spring.io. We had a lot of releases last week. We didn't get to do office hours last week. It was all my fault. But there's a lot of cool releases that came out last week.
Yeah, I know some of them moved too. I think to today.
Awesome.
Wait, no, that was on last Monday. Yeah, a lot of them were scheduled for I think 18th and 17th, and they ended up moving to the 21st. So, especially those Spring Data ones. So yeah, a lot of releases last week. Spring Data had a whole bunch of releases on Monday. Looks like we have some Kafka security. So you can see Spring Security 6.0 is moving in line with Spring Framework 6. So yeah, a lot of releases.
Go deep on, I see there Spring Security and Spring Auth Server are out there. Those are definitely things I'm excited about. I've already started upgrading my Spring Boot 2.6.4 to 2.6.5. One of the other conversations that we had, was it last week or was it the week before, where we were talking about Open Rewrite and having the idea of having like a recipe that says, hey, I just want to upgrade all my things. And instead of having to go manually, upgrade a POM or whatever, have something that can do it for us. So that's something maybe I'll bring to office hours soon. It's just like a quick Open Rewrite.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that'd be cool.
But lots of Spring Data stuff. But also there's that Spring REST docs. Have you done a lot of Spring REST docs?
No, not really. I think I played around with a couple demos, but I think most of the documentation that I've been doing over the last couple of years have been like in the enterprise space, and they've used Swagger, but Swagger on an enterprise level. So you have like one enterprise hub, and you basically have to submit your YAML files. So everything is open API spec, and we would like generate those YAML files and then submit them to Swagger Hub in one central place where everybody can kind of view them. So I wrote a lot of those YAML files by hand, which was not fun.
I did an exercise where we started with an API first. 15
yeah, that's what we did. Yeah,
API first. Do the API. Make sure everybody agrees before we do any work. We ran a workshop where, hey, we have this API, open API spec, Swagger, etc. And then we developed against it using both .NET and Spring. Yep. And the outcome was the exact same, right? We could actually use the same database and round robin requests, even writes across a .NET app and a Java app, and right into the same database. And it was super fun. But before that, I leaned in on the Spring REST docs. I liked that I had my my contracts, my tests, Spring REST docs generated documentation, and I had my tests built in so I could execute them, very similar to what you get with the Open API. But there were some limitations on what if it wasn't RESTful, and there was this AciDoc plugin. So I might want to circle back on that because I know that Open API spec is getting more popular. I know that our Spring Cloud Gateway is kind of joining into that, making it easier to adopt. The Open API spec. So maybe it's something that we need to explore as well.
It's funny when you say that when something isn't quite RESTful, because I found that to be the case more times than not. I mean, once you get past like CRUD and filtering and paging, you have to start making decisions, and it's like, well, this doesn't really feel RESTful, but we need to throw this in there. So
yeah, and now more than before, these event-driven architectures, they leave a little bit wanting with regard to how do you document that? How do you create tests for that? How do you create examples for that automatically with your documentation? Maybe that's something that we'll do on a code.
Well, Spring Cloud Contract is something we went down the road of too, which is really good. So if you're in that Open API first development mode, which again is it's smart because you're making sure that all parties have agreed on this before doing any development, because we've all been there. If you go the other route, you're going to write a whole bunch of code, and then people are going to go, that's not what we agreed to. It's like, okay, so there is a project called Spring Cloud Contract, which basically helps you live up to that contract and make sure that it's in place every time you're kind of checking in a distributed world. It helps out a lot. So something to check out.
Yeah.
So something else later in the week, you could see here on the 24th, we had some Spring Boot releases, 2.5.11, 2.6.5, 2.7.0 milestone 3. So we're getting closer to 2.7, which I think is next month or May. I'll have to check. And then we're getting closer and closer to Spring Boot 3. So we have a milestone 2 now. And that Spring Boot 3 should come out sometime the end of this year, sometime in the fourth quarter. So whole bunch of releases. And then I just threw a comment up on there from Codogrammar. The Java-based version has changed, right? You are correct. As we move to Spring Boot 3.0 and Spring Framework 6, the base is going to be Java 17, which at the time was a little bit kind of controversial. Everybody's like, wow, we're moving to 17. But now 18 just came out yesterday, and 19 is going to be out in the end of the year. So it's really not that aggressive.
Yeah. So people, audience, let us know in the chat what version of Java you're using today. Like, what's your default version today? Let us know in the chat. I've been defaulting to 17 for the reasons. There's a lot of cool stuff in it. And I feel like, I've got this mindset where it's okay to be on the bleeding edge as long as you know how to heal. Like, I'm going to keep on going forward. I have not installed Java 18 yet. Have you, Dan?
I did. I ran a quick demo last week. Because if you guys, let's go start.spring.io. If you look down here, there's Java 18. So I ran a quick demo just to see if I can run a quick demo, and I could. I wanted to verify something. Someone reached out to me on Twitter and said they couldn't build using Java 18, but it wasn't building. You can build an app. It was the Paquito build packs. You couldn't run an actual build pack. And that's not a Spring Boot thing supporting Java 18. That's the build packs not supporting Java 18. So, I talked to some folks on the Spring team, and they said, that we're waiting for support with that. So
I'm a big fan of the build packs.
Yep.
And that's probably something that it'll definitely mess with my my pipelines, etc. That's something that I'll have to keep an eye on. Build packs, Paquito build packs, and support for Java 18. Paquito.io, right?
I think that's right.
Throw that up there. Awesome. Cool. So that's the calendar.
Right. Yeah, so that's a calendar as a kind of what we were up to last week. So what we'll do now is just go into a couple demos. Again, I think, as far as the cadence goes, we'll talk about, what our week looked like last week. We'll talk about what's new, calendar, that kind of thing. We'll go into some demos of things that we looked at last week, and then we'll take questions. And we're taking questions today, but we're taking questions throughout the week, and anything that we find, interesting that we can kind of talk about, we'll do that here. So as I mentioned on the calendar, Spring Boot 3.0.OM2 is now available. And there is 50 bug fixes, some documentation improvements, and dependency upgrades. You can jump to the release notes to find out what's going on here. I am a huge fan of Groovy. If anybody's known me, I'm a big fan of Groovy. So Spring Boot 3.0 Milestone 2 now bumps the minimum supported version of Groovy to 4.0. There are some things there because of Spock and some other things why we kind of moved to 4.0, I believe. But I'm a big fan of this. I like to see that. So now if you create a new project with Groovy, you're going to get 4.0. I know this one really hurt Josh. Image banner support removed. So just so we're clear, we're not taking away this Spring banner. It's just the ability to use images like GIFs, JPEGs, PNGs. You can still use just a banner.txt file, and that will be the kind of banner that kicks up when the application starts. I think that's really due to performance. I would have to check on that, but I gotta believe that's the only reason for that. So some Micrometer binders, new and noteworthy. So support for EH cache has now been reinstated since now everything is moving over to Jakarta EE9. So if you're using that, just remember there is probably some dependency that has the Jakarta classifier on it. So make sure you look for that. H2 is back. So improved at constructor binding detection. So we looked at this. If you've watched my What's New in Spring Boot 2.6.4, we looked at the at constructor binding annotation no longer being needed for configuration properties when you're using a record. I think this is just further enhancing that for any configuration properties class. We're able to smart enough look at that and say, okay, you don't need the constructor binding. We get it. We'll go ahead and use that. But if you have more than one constructor, you'll still need to use it so you can tell Spring Boot which one to use. So again, some dependency upgrades, and then I'm going to look at this one, this miscellaneous one. So we have default values for record-based configuration properties now. And again, not a huge deal, but it's just a nice little change. So I figured I'd create a quick project here and show it off. So we're here at start.spring.io. I'm using a Maven project, Java. We're going to choose that new milestone 2.
I'm going to try to follow along.
Let's say dev.danvega. We'll keep it at demo. We're going to keep it at 17 for now. And I'm just going to add a couple of dependencies, the web, so I can create a controller, and the configuration processor, because we're going to create some configuration properties. And that's it. So we're going to generate. And I think I've already, yep. Let's just delete that. And I'm going to pull this in. All right, so as this kind of starts up here, what we're going to do is we're just going to create a simple project here. We're going to start off with a class, or actually a record, that is going to contain our configuration properties. And I think I'll just kind of rewind this back to configuration properties in general, because I put out a video on this. I don't think it was specifically on this. I think this was in the What's New in 2.6.4. And somebody had mentioned that they didn't know that you could do this. So I'll just talk about this. So if you want to make something configurable, so say you have some type of property that you want configurable. So I want to do a property that is greeting.salutation. And we may want to say hello. So I could say hello, Dan, or the salutation could be good morning, and then Dan, or whatever. So if I want this to be a configurable property, the way that this works is we need to create a class or a record that is a configuration property. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say I want to go ahead and create a greetings property. Greeting properties. Now this could be a class, but we can also use a record. So in here we're going to say configuration properties, and then you need to give it a prefix. So that prefix is going to be greeting. And then in the main application class, you just have to come in and say, I want to enable configuration properties. You can scan the entire project, or in our case, we don't need to. I just want to say, hey, this is the one class that we're going to look at. So now, whatever fields we create in here, so if I had a salutation, now I have a property that I can configure called greeting.salutation. So this is going to be a string. I can call it salutation. And just by doing that, we can go ahead and build our project. And if we look in the target directory, under generated sources, under classes, you'll see this metadata, and this is the metadata for that particular greeting property, which says, hey, I just have one property in here. It's a salutation. It's of type string. Here's the source type. So now when we go into here, we have that, IntelliSense helping us out saying, hey, greeting.salutation is a property that you can configure. So that is kind of the first step. What is changing in 3.0.2 milestone or 3.0.0 milestone 2 is now the ability to go ahead and add a default value. So I believe you can do this in a class already, just wasn't working in records. So we can come in here and say, I want you to go ahead and add a default value, add a little wave emoji, and say hello. So this is our default salutation, and I need to this is our default salutation if nothing is configured. Okay, so then what I can do is go and create a new controller. I'll call this greeting controller. Will be a REST controller. We'll have a simple get mapping, turn a string. So the first thing I'll need is I'll need an instance of the greetings property so I can get that salutation. So I will auto wire this in using constructor injection. Now in here, I can say return. I want the salutation, and then I'll just put my name after that. So if we go ahead and run this application now, I could go over to the browser and go to localhost 8080 and test that out, but here in IntelliJ, I can go ahead and test that out as well. So that is right there at localhost 8080. I'm going to run that, and we get that default greeting, which is the waving emoji plus hello, and then my name. So now what I can do is I want to overwrite that. So I actually want to configure something. So I can come in here and say greeting.salutation. And I don't know if you saw that, but let me get that back. So greeting, you can see the default there is actually showing up as well, which is really nice. So now I just want to say good morning. We will come over here and restart this. Go back here and run this again. And now we have good morning, Dan. So small change, but again, as we start using records more and more, we're increasing the usability of it by just fixing a couple things. I think this was just one of them. I don't think you could use the default value in a record before. I think that's what I read. You could use it in a class. So just a nice little touch of being able to add a default value to one of our properties here. And if looking, just to show you, we are using 3.0.0 milestone 2, and we're using Java 17. So that's really all I had.
Awesome. I think I can go through something quick. We'll ask if there's any questions, anything that anybody wants to talk about. Feel free to bring those in. Otherwise, I'm going to jump into another quick demo-ish. If I can get a screen here, I'll do the same thing. But yeah, feel free to ask questions. Again, office hours, we want to be able to connect to the community. We'll always have something. I think the default agenda is, hey, let's talk about what's on the calendar. We'll show a demo of something interesting that we found either while we've been working throughout the week or something that somebody's asked offline. And yeah, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So absolutely Q&A, I think, takes priority. The demos we can always do later. We can spin those out on a video later. But yeah, we want to use this time and make it valuable for people to bring their questions. I know there's a lot of channels, a lot of ways to get your questions answered, but this is just another that we thought might be more interesting because we had that instant feedback and we had this chat live demo kind of thing. And we can talk it out. Dan and I can both talk things out, even if we don't know the answer. Again, we don't have all the answers, but we do have Slack. So cool. I'm going to jump in, and I just want to talk through some of the stuff I did, again, last week. This idea of Eureka discovery. So I'm going to just walk through what I did there.
Yeah, and if you want to remind everyone, I know what it was, but kind of what was the initial question that got you down this road?
The initial question, I believe, was, hey, what's a use case where I don't want to register the client? I think was the question. Let me see if I can find it.
Yeah, I believe it was along those lines. Hey, you know what?
Service discovery using Eureka. What are some situations that might arise where we will want to disable the clients from registering on the Eureka server? Yeah, and this is great.
Yep.
So I was going down this path. I'm going to do this in Maven 265. We're going to do the discovery server. I'm going to default to 17. And yeah, let's explore this a little bit. I'm going to switch my screens around. Maybe I'll do that. Let me stop that screen. I'm going to switch these around a little bit so I can look. But yeah, I initially responded with, hey, maybe you're just consuming services and nobody's going to be looking for that client. So that's cool.
Yeah, because just to kind of cover what it is in general is, you know, you have all these microservices running in a distributed architecture, and you can't just say, hey, I want to talk to that service A, because where is service A? You don't know. On your local machine, you know exactly where it is because you've spun it up on localhost 9090, so you can talk to 9090 and say, give me all the customers. But in a distributed architecture where you're scaling multiple instances of that, you don't know where service A is. So that's the kind of, you know, idea behind Eureka is it will kind of set itself out there for discovery. So now, hey, anybody who wants to talk to service A can talk to it by name, and Eureka will figure out the internals of like exactly how to connect.
Yeah. So something like this, right? Where I'm service A or client A, whatever, they're going to typically ask this kind of centralized phone book. You know, we have DNS. Eureka is kind of like, I got a registry of all these services that are available. This is just one way of doing it. Like you said, hey, what if service A wants to talk to service D? Does it need to know the URL? That URL is going to change. IPs, you know, DNS, all that kind of stuff can change. You don't want to necessarily have DNS set up for all of your services. It's an option, but maybe not the best, right? In Kubernetes, we have that kind of internal DNS that we can use. But yeah, the idea here is, hey, I'm service A and I want to talk to service D. How do I find out where service D is? And what if there's more than one? Let's do this. What if there's more than one service D? Which one should I be talking to? So Eureka provides this way of doing it. I can just register with Eureka. I can get kind of a list of all of the other services that are registered so that I can know where I need to make my calls to. That's it. Does that make sense? Is that a good view of things? And the question is like, hey, do I really want to register? Because in this example that I'm showing, Eureka knows about A, B, C, D, and E. Is there ever a case where I've got, let's say, service F, where service F just wants to consume these guys? Does service F need to register with Eureka? Why would I not want to register with Eureka? Well,
I appreciate this diagram because it's one thing to talk about it but when you can see this, it just clicks for me and probably a lot more people. So thank you.
Yeah. At scale, depending on how many of these you've got, that just maybe keeping track of that might be prohibitive. One of the other things that you get when you register with Eureka is you've identified where all of these services are. You're capturing some metadata, the service, its health is an option, its IP address. So yeah, if I have hundreds of these that are just consuming A through E, if I have hundreds of those, keeping track and registering that is going to put a little bit of additional load on that Eureka server, if you will. But also, the case that we'll show here in a second is, does the Eureka server, it has a client built in. Does it need to register itself? There's cases where yes and no. So this is kind of the idea. This is that whole discovery, and it looks different in different environments. But the question was, is there ever a case where I don't want to register? And number one is at scale. Does anybody else need to know the address of all the different instances of F? If not, maybe you don't need to register. And that's just one example. And there's plenty more.
And there could absolutely be scenarios where F is not something that A, B, C, or D, or E need to talk to. F may publish events to some event system, right? And it does its own thing. Maybe it's like a scheduled task, like a cron job that pulls in data and then pushes it out to some event publishing system. In that case, nobody needs to talk to them. I can't think of any, there are a bunch probably off that I can't think of off the top of my head, but there are absolutely scenarios where it doesn't need to be known. And as Deshaun said in his initial answer is, if nobody needs to talk to that client, if nobody needs to talk to F, if nobody needs to discover where F is, then no, you don't need to register with. But
so now
I think that's my initial answer.
Yeah. So now my head is, in my past systems that I've done, one of the values of having all of the clients register was it allowed me to see that, yes, F is talking to Eureka. F should therefore be able to find A, B, C, D, and E. So I was using Eureka as kind of a health check, a status where I could see like, hey, is everybody connecting? Let's say I had, I'll zoom out here. Let's say I had F deployed in another data center, but I still wanted F to be able to communicate with these other services. I was using Discovery, Eureka Discovery, to determine like, hey, is it connected? Does it have access? And that was kind of a visible way for me to determine if everybody could see each other. And I think that the Spring Boot admin, which I think you can do out of the Spring initial, I think Spring Boot admin uses Eureka and captures that information to say, hey, here's the things that are connected. Here's what you can see.
Cool.
So let's jump in. I'm going to do Maven, Java 265. And yeah, I'm just going to call this example server. I chose 17. All I'm going to do is Eureka server. I am of the mindset that I will be adding actuator by default going forward. And I'm also, normally I'm adding Spring Native. I don't need to do that here because I know that the server's not going to support Spring Native. So yeah, I don't need to. So I won't. So that's my default. Let's grab that guy and we'll open that up. The other thing that I know is Josh, our friend Josh, has this nice little tool where when he creates something at start.spring.io, he automatically opens it up in IntelliJ. He's got a command line tool, and this has been on my mind for a while. He also did that Spring Shell demo a week or two ago, where he's making CLIs, command line interfaces, using Spring. And I've got a couple of ideas for how I might want to do that, and here's one of them, so that I can unzip my stuff and open it in IntelliJ easier. So let me do that. And let me open, and we'll get started. So the cool thing, hello, computer.
Quick tip. If you go up to, in IntelliJ, if you go up to tools, and let's see what it says. Are you on there?
I'm going to get there in just one sec. It decided to leave screens.
Oh, it reopened.
So I'm going to open the thing that I just did. Here. All right, you're going to give me a quick tip. Whoops, it went on the other screen. Hold on. Quick tip.
So if you go to Tools and create command line launcher.
Oh boy.
So now what this does, just hit OK. So now when you unzip that, you can just say idea and then the folder or the palm, and it will open up an idea from the command line.
That's what I needed. So I'm gonna do that. Let's do it. So I unzipped it. So I just do idea discovery.
Yeah, I'd grab the palm.
Do the
Because then
palm
it
file.
opens up as a Maven project, but it should figure it out.
All right, that worked. Excellent.
Cool.
He's doing his thing. Let's jump in. The cool thing here. Oh, I have this other default thing that I do as a. I won't do it now, but I normally rename. I like my applications to come out just name application, so that across all my projects, I know, hey, this is kind of that main Spring Boot application. I'm going to go ahead and do it. My index is done. I'm going to refactor and I'm going to rename that. It's just a habit, a thing. I know, hey, that's kind of the root. We'll rename everything. Cool. The only thing I need to do here is at enable. Nope. I want the server, Eureka server. And from there, I'm going to jump down to the terminal. I think I have some properties that I want to do. But first, I think we can do this. We can do mdnw clean install string. Let it get all of its stuff. Oh, you know what else we need to do? We need to look at the Maven daemon. Have you done anything with that yet? That's something it's hopefully going to make these things a little bit faster.
I just saw a tweet from someone this morning who said,
it's been in the works for a while. I know it's been available for a while, but I think it's going to come into upstream Maven, so we should hopefully get it from the wrapper. So here,
I saw 28% faster on a pretty large project, so pretty cool.
So all I did was start up this thing, and this is something that makes, I don't like having a bunch of error messages. So it says, hey, I'm trying to do some things. It's trying to register. It's trying to register itself with a client with that service, and it's not able to. And this is something that might throw somebody off. It's like, hey, what's going on here? And it'll continue to try to do that. So here's one example. Does your server need to register with itself? I think I can go and show this up and running. Is it going to be on 8080? Yeah. Oh, hey, this is the interface that I get with Spring Discovery Server. I didn't do any code. The only thing that I did here was at enable Eureka server. So out of the box, I have a server that's up and running. It's got a UI where I can start to see some things. I have my IP address. I can see how much memory it's taking. It says there's localhost. There's other replicas there, but I think that's just this one instance. So this is cool, sort of, because I still have all this stuff. So one of the other things I want to do is I want to kind of clean that up. And I grabbed a bunch of YAML. Let's copy that over. I think it's here. Source main resources. Let's copy that to discovery source main resources. Take a look. Oh wait, I'll stop this server. I'm going to remove this guy. This was empty. And I added some YAML to kind of address some of the things that we were talking about. I changed the default port here to 8761. That's what my other Eureka clients, they're going to default look for something on localhost 8761. So I did that so that if I were to do local development, I could have that, at that default location. I also gave it a name. I'm going to change it to Discovery Server. And here I said, hey, I have a config. I want to go get my configurations. You're getting this out of the box. There's two options. I can do discovery first or config first. And I default to discovery or to config first, or let me go get my configurations. That'll default at localhost 8888. And then, then I'll start up like, hey, how do I want to be configured? I'm going to do that here with my application YAML. And I'm saying here, don't register with Eureka. So at startup, don't worry about registering with the Eureka service. Don't grab the registry. Don't grab the information that exists because you don't need to. And I have a wait time sync, but this is my default for the actuator. I want to expose those endpoints to the web. So I have those HTTP endpoints. So tiny little changes here. Let's see what that does, how that behaves different. It's going to run its tests, and it actually does things during the test. And up and running with a little less logging on the output. Cool, just tiny changes, but it takes a little bit of research to figure out what you need to do. So here's just an example of how we can kind of clean up those logs. I still have a fully functional service, just on a different port, 8761. And it says, hey, you might not be configured. We don't have renewals. And again, working towards having that confidence that things are registering and showing up properly. So one of the other things is, when would I want my Eureka server to register? Well, within this same project, you can actually set up pairs. So they can kind of share like, hey, I've got services over here. Let me go back to my picture. I can show kind of this pair concept where, I can just do it like this. Or maybe I've got two clusters stuff. And maybe I want these guys to talk to each other to get access. So you can have this AZ awareness where, hey, services that are in AZ1 or data center 1, let's do it like this. Maybe you want them to go local first. But what if we're standing up new service H, and H is only available over here? It'd be nice for our clients on this side to be able to still get access to service H if it's possible across the AZs. But you can have that kind of failover, higher resiliency out of the box. These are options that are available with the Spring discovery server with Eureka. So it's just an example. So that was it. Getting started, standing these things up. I think one of the next steps would be to show like, hey, what does this look like in Kubernetes? How is it different? How are you going to deploy things? We're doing this work in a lot of channels. I'm trying to deploy these things onto Kubernetes. So same patterns that I've used in the past, but I'm going to deploy them in a slightly different way with Kubernetes, perhaps with Knative, etc. So we'll explore that further later this week.
Cool. Awesome demo. We did have a few questions come in, so let's see if we can answer those. Is there anything on the horizon for Spring Cloud data flow?
Oh, buddy. Spring Cloud data flow it's still amazing, right? It's still amazing tech. And I know that there's, it's still super powerful. And if you've used it, it's super easy to connect the dots. So yeah, if there's anything on the radar, I don't know, but I'm definitely interested in showing some of the awesome things you can do really quickly with something like Spring Cloud Dataflow. So I'm going to take a note of that. Like, hey, let's do a demo of Spring Cloud Dataflow real soon, like tomorrow or the next time we do this office hours. Again, we're trying to figure out what this cadence looks like. We want to be able to take questions like this. So let me just take some notes real quick.
All right, while you do so, I'm going to go ahead and grab this next question. So last week you mentioned going through legacy documentation of Spring Framework is a good way to understand the fundamentals. Can you show an example of what you meant with some Spring Framework docs? So I believe I mentioned this, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. I don't know if I use the word legacy because it's not legacy documents, but let's talk about it. So if you go over to spring.io and go to projects and go to Spring Framework, if you go under the Learn section, there's the reference documentation and then the API docs. So anytime you're working with a class or you don't know what a constructor looks like or a method, that's the API docs. The reference docs is, hey, let me kind of learn about some things here. And so what I was referencing is, the big question I always get is, okay, I want to learn Spring. Where do I start? And there are multiple avenues to learn. There are multiple reasons why you would learn Spring, right? You could be building web applications. You could be building serverless applications. You could be writing CLI applications. You could be writing native applications. So there are a bunch of different kind of things that you could be doing with Spring. But it all does boil down to the fundamentals of the Spring Framework, no matter which route you go. So what I was saying is that starting here with the overview and the core is really the first step, like understanding what Spring is, what it can do for you. And then the core really gets into kind of the defaults components of Spring, like what is the IOC container, the inversion of control, what is dependency injection, what does it mean, what are dependencies. Then you start to talk about all the things that you hear when people talk about a Spring application, like beans. What is a bean? Okay, now that you know what a bean is, what are the different scopes of a bean? How can I customize a bean? What's the bean definition inheritance? All these things that you need to understand about what a bean is, how it's put into the application context. What is an application context? Because you're going to hear that word a lot, and it's just a container of things. But when you hear all these terms, understanding the fundamentals of Spring is really that first step. Once you understand this, now you can say, okay, I want to build a web app. Well, go to start.spring.io. We're going to use Spring Boot for that because it simplifies everything and lets you just focus on, the business logic. And at the end of the day, when you start building out these applications, you're going to need, you build out a service and you need that instance in your controller, and that's dependency injection. Those are beans. Like those are all the fundamentals that we talk about here in the documentation. So this is probably my number one start. Again, it's like a book. If you don't need to read every single section, don't. If you're just getting started, I don't think you need to talk about caching and scheduling or Kotlin if you're not using Kotlin, etc. Pick your poison here, pick what you're working on. And then Spring Boot has the exact same thing. So if you go over to projects in Spring Boot, again, under Learn, there's reference docs and API docs. Start with the reference docs, and oh boy, there's a lot here because Spring Boot does a lot of things. So again, pick what you're kind of working on and start in the docs. I think people's first assumption is to go out, okay, I want to learn Spring. Where's a course or a YouTube video that teaches me how to do this? But this is really a really great starting place before you jump into some type of tutorial. Start here at the documentation.
Yeah, I'll be honest and transparent. I don't normally read the docs before I jump into something. Normally, I'm going to jump into that section right there, just getting started. I will try to get something working and then try to like glue pieces together. Like, hey, is that named right? Oh, if they're naming it this, I'll try to kind of like use the things that I know to fill in the gaps. And if I've got further questions, then I'll go back to the docs.
So
And
a good place for someone who does that exact route, I would say, is a guide. So the guides are, in your case, like if you wanted to build a web app, you could come in here and, or a RESTful web service, for example, you could follow this guide that will teach you how to build something. Because we are like, as developers, like we don't want to read too much. We want to like build something. And so this gets you into building something. And now, okay, now let me go back to the docs and try to connect all those dots, some things that I might have been missing by just jumping right into that code. So yeah, great point there.
Another question from Philip. Thank you for joining, Philip. He asks, how can I read JSON data in Spring Boot? And I am asking myself two questions. The first one is, what does that mean? Like, are you talking like file IO, or because it's Spring Boot, you have a service that's getting some JSON data somehow? So that'd be my initial question. But yeah, those are two very different answers. You want to elaborate on either of those?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. It just depends which route you're going, because if you're just consuming some JSON data, right, a REST service can do that. Jackson on the website can handle all of that for us. It's a whole bunch of magic that fixes all that for us. If you just want to read like an actual JSON file, I believe I have an example of that. Maybe not. But yeah, it's just, oh, here we go. How to read JSON data. So I do have a video on that, Spring Boot reading JSON data. So I read an actual JSON file. But at the end of the day, if you're just reading a file of data, I mean a JSON. Okay, so scratch this one. Yeah, so if you're just sending in like data from Postman, this is going to be in, say, a REST service. You're going to accept that data. Let me fire up one real quick. Just so we're in here. So I'm going to use this service that I was already in and say, let's just create a new Java class, and we'll call this a customer controller. And this is a REST controller, and this has a request mapping of, say, customers. So if you wanted to read in some data, you may have something like a post mapping here. So this is not going to return anything, or you could return something, but I'm not going to. I want to create a new customer. So you would have maybe a customer type. So we call this customer. We don't have this, but we can go ahead and create a class, and maybe customer is, let's say this is a record, so we keep things simple. Now in this create method, what we want to do is we're actually not going to do anything with this, but the way that we're not returning anything. The way that you do that is, so this customer is a customer type. What we are saying is we are going to accept some JSON in the request body. And I want you to take that request and try to map it to a customer. So one way that you can do that is by saying request body here. And now Jackson will basically line up the JSON and try to create a customer from that. So if we look at that, let's just say customer. So if I come in and restart this application, and if I go ahead and go to customer controller, I can generate this request. So this is a content type, application/JSON. So I want you to create something with first name, last name. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and I just simply am going to output that to the console. But if we go ahead and run this and look at the console, We have first name and last name is null because, sorry, request body. We are taking in the request body of customer. Let me run this. Customer is, oh, first and last. So that may be why. So now if I go ahead and run this, you can see that that was created. So from a JSON standpoint, again, you're probably taking it to map to some type of web request. In this case, I'm creating it. I'm using a post mapping to accept a post request from some other service or from Postman or from the HTTP client I'm using here. And that is the way that we do that as an argument here is by using that @request body annotation. And that really just says, hey, that indicates that a method parameter should be bound to the body of the web request. So again, whether it's in Postman or here, this is the body of the web request, and that's how it kind of, and then Jackson underneath the hood. It's not magic. There is a project underneath the hood called Jackson that does all of this out of the box for you. This is an example where first lines up with first and last lines up with last. So this is a very simple example. This can get very complicated and there's ways to like make things work, but at the simplest form, this is kind of how that works.
What if I want to get first name from the request?
Right. So here we go. First name, and let's just do it at that. And then here in our customer, we could say, hey, you're actually going to pull that from a JSON property called first name, not first, right? So if we go ahead and restart this and we run this, same thing. So as I said, if it doesn't match up quite like that, there are ways to basically tell Jackson how these things are going to map.
Another question from Dark Developer. I'm kind of confused with Spring Native. Does Spring Native bring performance for us, like handling more requests per second? Does it support every dependency out there? Great question. Thank you for asking. I am going to, I'll put this over here and share that screen. And we'll jump right to the docs so that you can get familiar with those docs.
Yeah, I think I saw a question over the weekend too. Somebody asked, like, why would I care about Spring Native? What are some use cases for it? And I think that's one of the questions that some people always ask too.
So for me, it's about getting more value out of the same infrastructure. So one example is, Java. Java has the JVM, and that JVM does a lot of amazing things for us. But as you're moving into these different architectures, one of the things that I like to be able to do is have this serverless concept where I can have services running when they're needed and not running when they're not needed. And there's value to that. So I'll go back to our same example. So let's say in my environment, I want to have all of these available. I want all these services available and running in some cloud or other. But let's say A doesn't get used very much. So if it's not being used or it's not meeting some threshold, it shuts down. One of the things that Spring Native gives you is a faster startup time. So that, hey, I haven't been using A, but now all of a sudden I need something from that service A. So I make a request to service A spins up, it does its thing, and it gives me my response, the thing that I was looking for. Spring Native, it compiles to that native code. So instead of having the JVM, it makes it, one thing is a faster startup. And then also it can have a smaller footprint. So instead of being a container of 190 megabytes, maybe the container is only 120 megabytes. And maybe that container, when it's running with the JVM, it takes a gigabyte of memory, and without, it only takes 300 megabytes of memory or whatever. So these are some of the things that you get with Spring Native, but that's at a cost, right? There's a negotiation that you're doing. Your compiling takes longer. So doing local development, it takes longer to turn around a Spring Native image. But you're asking like, hey, what else does it give me? Faster startup time, smaller footprint, can be smaller memory, but there's trade-offs in build time. At scale, there's some things that you can do with garbage collection, for example, that you can't without. You have some of these things. It's a great opportunity to explore. It's all building on top of the Graal VM, which allows you to do that native compilation. But is it fully baked? No, it's not fully baked yet. So it doesn't work with all of the Spring dependencies. These are the ones that don't take any additional configuration. They will compile to native images. And there's a nice long list, and that list continues to get bigger as we go forward. We are hoping that with Spring Framework 6 and Spring Boot 3, that, we can do the native compilation across the board, and we won't have this extension to Spring Native that'll just kind of be built in. Hopefully that answers your question. You can imagine if my laptop only has 16 gigabytes of memory, like it does, and I want to run a bunch of services on it, it can be hard if they're all running a JVM. But if they're all native images, or they're doing that serverless deployment model with something like Knative Serving, I can have a bunch of services running. They can start up quickly when I need them, and I can continue to do my work. So I've got this kind of picture in my head of having a bunch of natively compiled services running on my laptop. Whether I'm using them or not, I can still deploy them all and only call them when I need them, only use them when I need them, but still have them all deployed on my local TCE with Knative Serving as a way for me to grow faster, keep developing faster, and not have to worry about switching contexts. Everything can just be running, but scaled to 0, for example. So hopefully that helped. The idea is just, smaller footprint, native compilation. And if you're watching the show or you're following along, it's not just about Andy 64. So I can take that same Java application, I can compile it natively for my Mac laptop, but also for my ARM64, my Raspberry Pi. And I can run now Java applications, Spring Boot applications that would normally had a sizable footprint of a gigabyte of memory or more. I can run those exact same applications natively compiled for ARM64 on a Raspberry Pi Zero that's only got 512 megs of memory available. But I can still have a Spring Boot RESTful service deployed on a device that only has 512 megabytes of memory. So hopefully that answered your question. And I would love to go further if you've got more questions about it, but that ought to get you started. I hope it helped. But again, great question. Thank you for joining and thank you for asking. Awesome questions. Great day.
Cool. Yeah, I have that on my backlog of things to put some demos together for, is just the idea of serverless and like, okay, I know there's this like AWS Lambda thing, and hey, if I build a front end and I just want to like have a service that can insert some records and then send an email, how do I do that? So I think, I always, there's this great book that's titled Start with the Why. So I always start with the why, like why serverless? What are some use cases for it? So I want to do that. And then, okay, how do I do that in Java? Because, there's a ton of examples out there of how do I do this in Node or in JavaScript. And there's a bunch of examples on that. Not as many examples on Java and specifically Spring. So hopefully we can put together some demos on that kind of stuff just to make people aware that that's something that you can do.
Well, for you, and transparency, like I like to have all of my demos available at any moment. So now as I'm moving towards this TCE kind of footprint, I can have all of my demos deployed via Knative serving to my cluster that's running on my laptop. It's not consuming a bunch of resources.
Right.
But when I want to switch from, hey, my start with the login page first demo and slides, I can have those up and running at the click of a button. And then I want to switch to my Spring Native Pi demos. I can click button. It's going to pull up that demo and I can do it. So I can have all of these demos, all these applications running on my laptop, deployed and available at the click of a button. So that's one way that I can do it. And they will start up faster because they are compiled with Spring Native. And the experience is going to be great because I can have them all deployed on this limited set of resources. So yeah, that's a use case that I'm actively heading down.
Cool.
Again, thanks for the questions. We're overtime. When we have questions like this, that makes it that much more fun for me. When I hear people saying, "Hey, they got their answers," that makes me feel good. Like we're doing
office hours plus.
Office hours plus. We're figuring out if we can do this a little bit more often. So yeah, just stay tuned. The normal channels, we're on the Twitters and GitHubs, and we have this new Spring community. But last week they asked, "Hey, do we still have the Stack Overflow?" Yes, still a great option. Gist or Gitter, we have options there. Yes, absolutely. We have lots of places to go to get questions answered. And do what works for you. But here's just one more. Get some feedback, quick questions, quick answers. Definitely great questions. Any parting words?
I got to tell you, I was going to open with this, but I've owned like 4 to 5 tablets in my life, so I haven't owned a ton. But I picked up the iPad Air 5 over the weekend, and for the price and the form, it's just one of the greatest tablets I've ever owned. It's so fast. It's got the M1 in it. And I know I'm sounding like an Apple fanboy in here, but I just love tablets for around the house, being able to read books on there, watch videos on there. So if you're in the market for a tablet, the iPad Air 5 is a great option.
I also have a tablet here. I got the iPad Pro. This is my first time ever having an iPad.
Nice.
You might have noticed I was asking, like, hey, how do I do... I want a terminal. Like, what's the best way to get a terminal? I got that figured out.
Nice.
I use Tailscale.
What is it?
So I use Tailscale to set up all my different nodes, so I have a VPN for all my different systems. And then I use, I'll tell you the name of it, Termius. So I've got my keys installed, and I'm using Termius, I think is the name of it.
Yep. I see it. The SSH client that works on desktop and mobile.
And it's working. So I have had a lot of fun because the battery life is so awesome. It's tiny.
I know.
I can take it everywhere. So I'm on that same track where I'm using this iPad a little bit more to watch videos, to keep up with all the awesome stuff that our teammates are doing. I feel like I have major FOMO. Like if I miss one of the other shows, I'm like, wait, what did I miss?
I know.
I know. So I have this like queue. I watch more Twitch and YouTube than I watch TV, and it's nice to just kind of like keep up. I love learning, and this new mode of iPad for taking notes and getting an SSH terminal on my laptop or on my desktop is really nice.
Totally. Cool. Well, that's all I got. Looking forward to our next show. Like I said, probably going to be next Monday. Hopefully I can make some progress on my presentation, and then we can increase this to maybe a couple times a week.
Yeah.
And I'm still thinking, I just want to find somewhere to like, I know we're taking questions on Twitter, just maybe somewhere we can take more questions that may be more of a deeper dive. Because sometimes it's hard to, like some of the questions we got today were pretty easy to go over, but sometimes we get questions that are a little bit more depth, and we'd like to prepare for some of those. So and that could be part of like a demo that we do. So somewhere just to take some more of those questions. So we'll work on that. Again, we're working on the show is a work in progress. So
Yeah. And I have these notes over here. Like, there are there's some tips that we could share about how to create a good question on Stack Overflow, how to put a good question on Gitter, and how to create a good issue in GitHub or GitLab. Just some little tips and tricks that hopefully can help get questions answered, but then also help our community help each other. Right? If we can ask questions the most effectively, maybe we can get those answers flowing a little bit better. So yeah.
cool. One thing I just thought of too that I do in all my YouTube videos now is you can use chapters. So it's like a timestamp to a specific thing. So maybe what I'll do is go back and on the replay for these office hours on YouTube, we can add some chapters for like each of the questions being asked. So like here's Dan's demo of 3.0.0 milestone 2. Here's Deshaun's demo of Eureka server. Here's question 1, 2, 3. So people can jump right to those.
Excellent. Great
Cool.
idea. Thanks everybody for joining.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Feedback. Let us know how it's going, what you'd like to see. And yeah, until next time.
Peace.
Peace.